Welcome back to Narrations. This month's stories are about new beginnings, escape, and the difficult search for meaning when the life we're given no longer feels true. Tonight's movie is Into the Wild, a deeply reflective, unsettling, and emotional story about freedom, idealism, solitude, and the cost of rejecting human connection in the pursuit of truth. This is not a movie about adventure. It is a movie about dissatisfaction, about moral restlessness, about the dangerous beauty of believing too strongly in one idea. The story opens quietly, with a sense of inevitability already hanging in the air. Deep in the Alaskan wilderness, far from roads, towns, and voices, an abandoned bus sits rusting among trees and tall grass. Inside it lies a young man, weak and alone, surrounded by notebooks filled with observations, quotes, and realizations written too late. His name is Christopher McCandless. Before the wilderness, before Alaska, before isolation, Christopher lived a life that looked successful by every outward measure. He grew up in a middle-class suburban home, raised by parents who valued achievement, discipline, and appearances. His father was driven, controlling, and ambitious. His mother was loving but conflicted, often caught between keeping peace and acknowledging painful truths. From an early age, Christopher noticed the cracks beneath the surface. Arguments went unresolved. Truths were hidden. Love felt conditional. Christopher was intelligent, thoughtful, and deeply introspective. He excelled academically and developed a strong moral compass shaped by literature, writers who glorified simplicity, self-reliance, and rebellion against materialism. Books were not entertainment to him. They were instruction manuals for living. As Christopher grew older, his discomfort with modern society intensified. He saw greed everywhere. He saw hypocrisy in institutions, in family structures, and in the pursuit of status. He began to view money as corruption and comfort as moral weakness. College only sharpened this worldview. While his parents celebrated his achievements and spoke excitedly about his future career, Christopher felt trapped. He didn't want promotions, houses, or expectations. He wanted authenticity, something raw and unfiltered. After graduating, Christopher makes a decision that feels sudden to everyone except himself. He donates his entire savings to charity. He abandons his car. He cuts off contact with his parents. And then he renames himself Alexander Supertramp. This is not a nickname. It is a rejection of identity itself. By erasing his name, Christopher believes he is freeing himself from history, obligation, and the expectations that suffocated him. He wants to exist only in the present, guided by instinct rather than responsibility. He begins traveling across America with almost nothing: a backpack, a rifle, books, and an unshakable belief that society is the enemy of truth. Along the way, Christopher meets people who briefly enter his life and then disappear, not because they reject him, but because he refuses to stay. He works odd jobs. He camps in isolation. He drifts from place to place. Many of the people he meets are lonely in their own ways. They see something in Christopher: intelligence, sincerity, a spark of moral clarity. They offer him food, shelter, work, and companionship. Again and again, they invite him to stay. And again, he leaves. One of the most profound connections Christopher forms is with Ron Franz, an elderly widower who has lived a life shaped by loss. Ron sees in Christopher a son, a student, a reason to care again. He teaches him skills, shares stories, and opens his heart cautiously. Eventually, Ron asks Christopher if he can legally adopt him. Christopher refuses. Not because he doesn't care, but because he believes attachment weakens independence. He convinces himself that love creates dependency, and dependency is a trap. Ron is left devastated, though grateful for the brief connection. Christopher moves on. Throughout his journey, moments of joy and isolation blur together. At times, Christopher feels profoundly alive, swimming naked in rivers, watching sunsets in silence, surviving by his own effort. At other times, loneliness creeps in quietly. But Christopher mistakes loneliness for strength. The idea of Alaska begins to dominate his thoughts. To Christopher, Alaska represents purity. A final frontier untouched by society, where he can test himself against nature and finally prove that he can live without compromise. He prepares, but not enough. He underestimates the land. He overestimates his resilience. He believes courage can replace experience. When Christopher finally reaches the Alaskan wilderness, he finds the abandoned bus that will become his shelter. At first, life feels triumphant. He hunts. He reads. He writes. He feels validated in his rejection of the world. But slowly, reality intrudes. Food becomes unpredictable. Isolation deepens. The silence grows heavy. The wilderness does not care about ideals. And as weeks pass, Christopher begins to understand that freedom without preparation is not freedom at all. Still, he pushes forward. Still, he believes meaning lies just beyond the next hardship. And so, alone in the vastness of Alaska, Christopher McCandless begins the most difficult chapter of his journey, one that will force him to confront the limits of his philosophy. Christopher McCandless steps fully into the Alaskan wilderness, believing this is the final purification, the place where all contradictions will dissolve and clarity will finally arrive. At first, life feels almost sacred. The days are long and quiet. The air is clean. The land feels vast and untouched. Christopher hunts small animals, gathers berries, and reads his books by the light coming through the bus windows. He writes in his journal, reflecting on authors who once guided him and experiences that shaped him. For a while, his philosophy feels validated. He is alone, but not afraid. Hungry, but not desperate. Cold, but not defeated. The wilderness becomes a mirror, reflecting back his confidence and his belief that he was right to walk away from everything. But nature does not reward belief. It rewards preparation. As the weeks pass, survival becomes less romantic and more demanding. Food sources become unreliable. Animals disappear. Plants that once seemed abundant grow scarce. The effort required to secure each meal increases, while Christopher's strength slowly diminishes. He begins to make mistakes. Small ones at first, misjudging distance, underestimating weather, wasting energy. Each mistake compounds the next. And unlike society, the wilderness offers no forgiveness. One day, Christopher manages to kill a moose. At first, it feels like triumph. Proof that he can provide for himself. Proof that he belongs here. But the victory quickly turns into tragedy. Lacking proper tools and knowledge, he is unable to preserve the meat. Over the following days, he watches helplessly as it spoils. The moment breaks something inside him. Not because he failed, but because he understands what the failure means. Life here is not about courage or ideals. It is about skill. About respect for forces larger than oneself. The moose's death becomes a symbol of arrogance, of misunderstanding, of the cost of believing that intention alone is enough. From this point on, the wilderness becomes hostile. Hunger gnaws constantly. Christopher's body weakens. His movements slow. He spends more time lying still, conserving energy, writing obsessively in his journal. The tone of his writing changes. Earlier entries spoke of freedom and self-discovery. Now they are filled with calculations, warnings, corrections, frantic attempts to learn too late what he should have known before. He studies plant guides carefully, hoping to find sustenance. He eats roots and seeds, trusting his limited knowledge. One mistake, a single plant misjudged, accelerates his physical decline. He packs his things and sets out toward civilization, believing he can still return to the world he rejected. But when he reaches the river he crossed months earlier, he finds it transformed. What was once a gentle crossing is now a roaring, impassable force. The land has closed behind him. Christopher is trapped. This moment is devastating not because of danger alone, but because of what it represents. The world he walked away from is no longer accessible on his terms. He returns to the bus, no longer defiant, only resigned. Inside the bus, Christopher turns inward in a way he never allowed himself before. He thinks of the people he met, those who offered kindness, shelter, and love. He thinks of Ron Franz, the old man whose loneliness mirrored his own in ways he refused to see. He thinks of his parents, flawed and imperfect, yet still aching for him. For the first time, Christopher allows himself to acknowledge something he spent years denying. That independence does not replace connection. That freedom without love becomes isolation. That meaning cannot survive without sharing. In his journal, he writes his final realization. Happiness is only real when shared. It is not a poetic thought. It is a confession. Christopher's final days are quiet and deliberate. He organizes his belongings. He writes goodbye messages. He takes one last photograph of himself, thin, weak, but strangely peaceful. He thanks life for what it gave him, even as it takes everything back. There is no dramatic struggle. No last-minute rescue. Just silence. When Christopher McCandless dies alone in the bus, the story does not frame him as a hero or a fool. It presents him as human. Idealistic. Flawed. Searching. The film then widens its gaze to those left behind. Ron mourns deeply, carrying the weight of love offered and refused. Christopher's parents are shattered by grief, forced to confront both their failures and their enduring love. His sister, who understood him more than anyone, carries his story forward, not as a legend, but as a warning and a lesson. Into the Wild does not offer easy answers. It does not condemn Christopher's desire to escape. Nor does it glorify his isolation. Instead, it asks a harder question. How do we live authentically without cutting ourselves off from others? How do we reject what is false without rejecting love itself? As part of this month's theme of new beginnings, this story reminds us that starting over does not mean disappearing. It means choosing a life aligned with our values, while remaining open to connection, humility, and shared meaning. Freedom without wisdom becomes danger, and solitude without love becomes emptiness. If you enjoyed listening to this narration, please like the video. It helps these stories reach more listeners. Share it with someone who appreciates thoughtful, reflective films. And subscribe for more long-form movie narrations about hope, purpose, and the search for meaning. Thanks for listening.